Folu Akindoyin, and I am a principal social worker working at a UK adoption agency. And this is my service, 6 p.m. Thank you very much. Awesome. My day-to-day life consists of working with children who are currently in our foster care system. We have about 74,000 children in care, and we're trying to place as many as possible for adoption. Last year, collectively with local authorities and agencies, we managed to place 3,800 children for an adoptive placements. There's still lots of work to be done, but we're trying to make a difference where we can. I was born and raised in the southeast of England, but as you can see, I have African roots. Yes, I do. Nigeria, to be specific. Nigeria, I know, we're always so loud. Why? I don't know. We love it. And having Nigerian parents, education was always a huge conversation in our household, and Mum had earmarked plans for us from the womb. The schools, the university, and our occupation. So she said things to us like, you become a doctor, or a lawyer, or an engineer. She was very much convinced we would do these things and be doctors and be amazing and have bachelors and masters and PhDs. And I wanted to be a gymnast, quite frankly, which I think is amazing. And by faith, one day, just, I'm believing for it. And my mum just was having none of it, so I thought I'll just have a career. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I decided I would, toe the line and have a traditional route into occupations. And I was 15 one night. I remember being at home, and I was watching the news, very intellectual of me, and the TV on the television, and I was bouncing on my mum's exercise trampoline, just a small circular thing, jumping up and down, getting faster and faster, higher and higher, thinking nothing of what was happening really. And then on the television, there was a story being told about a 7-year-old girl who moved from the Ivory Coast in West Africa to London. And she moved here for a better life, to have a hope and a future. But what she experienced was something very, very different. She lived with extended family, and they effectively tortured her, abused her, and took her life. And I can remember being on that trampoline and just my jumps getting lower and lower and slower and slower until I just stopped. And the only thing moving were just tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe the injustice of what I was hearing, what I was seeing, and I can still see her face now. Her name was Victoria Climbié, and this happened just up the road in Haringey. I didn't understand how someone could do that and why. And I felt really disempowered as a teenager. What could I possibly do? I had no power, I had no resource, I had no authority, but I had this pain in my heart because of what had happened to this girl, and I knew I had to do something at some point. I believe God really and truly marked me there and then to have a compassion for children, to protect children one day in the future, and those seeds were sown there 20 years ago, and that's exactly what I'm doing today. So I spent a few years working and studying. I went to university and did psychology and sociology as an undergrad, and then worked in youth camps and mentoring. And I really enjoyed working with children and young people, but I wanted to understand some of the adult stuff a bit better. So I opted to go and work in substance misuse for a few years. This was in Bristol. And I worked with incredibly chaotic, complex, and quite challenging people. But let me tell you, addictions can touch anybody. We had teenagers, we had 60-year-old men, we had mothers, we had pregnant mothers, we had everyone, professional, street homeless, who had addictions to heroin and to crack and to alcohol. And I just saw humanity was just crying out. It wasn't even about the drugs, it was about the inner pain and anguish and unmet emotions and difficulties that could not be dealt with other than numbing with substances. And I just really felt like I wanted to understand this more and more and more and understand humanity. So I decided to go back to university, move to London, and get my master's. Mum was thrilled by this, obviously. So I moved to London about 7.5 years ago, and after my 2-year course, I found myself deciding, what am I going to do next? Where am I going to work? And all the roles that I really wanted to do that involved direct work with children and young people were basically unqualified social worker roles. And thought to myself, just spent 2 years studying, 2 years not working full-time, not earning any money, not sleeping very much, and now, am I even going to be a social worker? And I had frustration kind of itching away, and I had this voice of pride as well. Take a role that's going to pay you proper money. Take a role that will give you status and give you a title. But I had to remember my identity was not in a title, it was not in a salary, it was in Jesus. And I kept that at the forefront of my mind and motivated me to do what God was calling me to do. And you know what? Just being really faithful with my yes opened doors that, really and truly were God. It's so easy to have plans, and it's crucial we do have plans. Proverbs 16:9 says, in a man's heart, he prepares his way, but the Lord directs his steps. And it's crucial that we do have plans, and we are going to partner with God, but actually allow him to actually move in his timing and be in alignment with what he is saying when he is saying it as well. And I had Colossians 3:23 on my heart constantly. I just decided to make a commitment to do everything to glorify God. It says here, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. It then goes on to say, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. And by having this attitude, it just kind of showed. I guess it was in contrast to what other people were used to seeing. And one day, my manager took me to one side and just said, Folu, thank you. I trust you, and I'll give you anything you need. And she basically was just so taken aback by what she was seeing and how I approached things. And it was just biblical principles of stewardship, of entrustment, of glorifying God, and it was coming out. So, yeah. So, I guess over these next few years, I've learned to always trust God and just give him the capacity he needs to actually work through me. I'm a vessel for him to be glorified. And I think it's really been evident over the past couple of years. I was approached 2.5 years ago to be an adoption social worker. And in my head, this was something I would do when I was about 50, like at the end of my career, because it's been a real desire for me to do. But I was completely underqualified at this point. All of my colleagues had about 20 years experience in adoption, and I had none. And I realized then that it really wasn't about me, about being underqualified, overqualified. It's about just being in alignment with God and allowing him to use you and to orchestrate your steps. And if he opens doors and he positions you and he calls you, no man can shut them. So just be honest and just be available to be used of him. And you know what, in my sphere, I've really just, I really adore it. My career's been really insightful, and it's made me expand my grace zone like no other. And adoption is something that's so close to my heart, but I also hold it quite lightly. And I've learned just to be responsive to what God is saying. I want to partner with him in everything and not just have my own agenda. And when I do my assessments, or when I read reports of the things children have gone through, you know, it's really easy as in our humanity to cast judgment and to see people a bit like this. I look at some of the reports and I could think, gosh, what kind of parent was that? She didn't feed her child. This parent drank too much alcohol. This parent took too many drugs. This parent didn't school their child. And the list goes on and on and on. And before you know it, you start to cast judgment on people and stop seeing people as people. Ultimately, nobody is born into a world wanting to be a drug user, wanting to abuse children. And that's a real tension I have to carry, because I have such a heart for children. But I have to remember, some of these parents who do things were also children once upon a time as well. And I want us to have the compassion and the depth of heart to see people and see people as Jesus sees them, because God sees a level playing field here. He doesn't see layers of levels. He just sees us all in the same. He says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So I want us to have that in mind, and I have to have that in mind whenever I'm in my sphere, just to know that actually it's both the grace of God that, you know, that hasn't been the walk I've had to go through. I think the scripture in Romans 8 puts it really beautifully. It's in the Message translation, verses 38 to 39. And it says, I'm absolutely convinced that nothing living or dead, angelic or demonic, today or tomorrow, high or low, thinkable or unthinkable, absolutely nothing can get between us and God's love, because of the way that Jesus, his master, has embraced us. So church, let's always just have a heart to know that we're here to give grace, and more grace, and aim to see people the way in which Jesus sees them. Thank you.